Before you sink your teeth into a funnel cake or laugh your way through the tilt-a-whirl this summer, pause. Because beneath the lights and laughter, every county fair carries a dark history. One built on blood, fire, and tragedy. I am your morbidly curious host and lover of all things amusement parks, Marissa, and I'm taking you deep into the dark side of the county fair. This 3-part series will explore some of the darkest tragedies at the fairs. We are going to dive deep into the early history and some of the buried tragedies before 1950. Buckle up, keep your hands and feet inside the ride, because this is Death Kiss Traveler. Before the thrill rides, before the flashing lights, and long before the Ferris wheel lit up the night sky, the fair was born in a field. And it wasn't about fun. It was about survival. It was a crisp autumn day in 1811, and the townspeople of Pittsfield, Massachusetts, were going about their business, unaware that history was quietly unfolding in the town green. Standing alone in the center of it all was Elkanah Watson, a sharp-eyed agriculturist and visionary businessman. At his side stood 2 merino rams, their wool thick, their posture proud. These sheep were unlike anything most New Englanders had ever seen. Rare, valuable, and bred with precision. But Watson wasn't there to sell them. He wasn't bartering or trading. He was there to make a statement. He believed American farming was stuck in its ways, isolated, inefficient, and overly modest. He imagined something bigger, a public forum where farmers could share ideas, showcase animals, compare crops, and yes, even compete. So there he stood, with his sheep, turning heads and inviting curiosity. Locals gathered, asked questions, took notes. The buzz was electric. The town didn't forget. Neither did Watson. By the following year, with Watson's urging, Pittsfield organized a proper event. Judges were appointed, prizes offered, and farmers from miles around came to show off the fruits of their labor. It was no longer a quiet demonstration. It was a celebration. That moment on the green, simple, spontaneous, sparked something massive. It was the birth of the American Agricultural Fair, and like wild clover in the wind, the idea spread fast across the country. Many county fairs were held in New York and New Jersey. The first state fair opened in Syracuse, New York in 1841. It was sponsored by the New York Agricultural Society. More than 15,000 people attended over 3 days. Across New England and into the growing Midwest, county fairs began to sprout in towns and rural crossroads. Each one became a showcase for progress. Farmers brought their fattest hogs. Housewives entered their best jams. Boys showed off their calves they raised from birth. It was education. It was pride. It was community. But soon, it became more. By the mid-1800s, the fair had begun to evolve. Horse races were added to draw larger crowds. Vendors rolled in with booths of candy and pipe tobacco. Traveling performers brought freak shows, acrobats, and fortune tellers. Eventually, machines arrived. Steam-powered carousels that creaked and groaned as they spun children in circles. Sideshows were gaining speed. Women's horse racing was a big hit at the Iowa State Fair. Prizes included a gold watch and $165 cash prize. About $6,800 today. Sadly, the event was later declared immodest for women, and it was banned. In 1851, London hosted what many considered the first true World's Fair, inside the stunning Crystal Palace in Hyde Park. Known as the Great Exhibition of the Works of Industry of All Nations, it was a massive showcase of global innovation, art, and technology, setting the standard for all international expos that followed. Fast forward to 1876, and the United States stepped into the spotlight with the Philadelphia Centennial Exposition. America's first World's Fair, held to honor the 100th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. It was more than a patriotic celebration. It became a giant stage for American industry and invention, with over 10 million visitors attending between May 10th and November 10th. People were blown away by all kinds of new and exotic products, from bananas, a novelty at the time, to Alexander Graham Bell's brand new telephone. The fair helped reshape how the world saw the once rebellious young nation. It was 1861, deep in the heart of Connecticut, when a man named Thomas Bradshaw unveiled something the American public had never seen before: a steam-powered carousel. Unlike the hand-cranked versions of old Europe, this machine whirled to life with industrial strength, puffing steam, turning gears, and setting wooden horses into a graceful gallop. Each horse was hand-carved, some fierce and wild-eyed, others mid-leap. Manes swept back like they were charging into battle, and as they spun, a pipe organ played, cheerful tunes that drifted through the fairgrounds like magic. It wasn't just entertainment, it was mechanized enchantment, a marvel of craftsmanship and innovation that left fairgoers stunned. Word spread quickly. Within a few years, carousels became cornerstones of county and state fairs. They arrived on flatbed wagons, hauled in by the rough and ready class of American wanderers, known as carnies, traveling showmen who brought not only the rides, but the mystery, noise, and light that defined the traveling fair. The steam carousel didn't just spin. It captured imaginations, drawing young and old into its orbit. And with every turn, it helped cement the carnival's place in American culture. It wasn't until 1893, Chicago World's Fair, that something new was born: the Midway. This stretch of exotic exhibits, rides, freak shows, and games inspired a movement. In 1893, a group of ambitious Chicago businessmen set out to make their mark on the world stage. The result was the World's Columbian Exposition, held to celebrate the 400th anniversary of Christopher Columbus's arrival in the New World. Backed by a declaration from the 51st U.S. Congress, the fair was more than a tribute to history. It was a bold display of American innovation and industrial power. Nicknamed the Chicago's World Fair, it introduced over 27 million visitors to a stunning array of inventions and products for the very first time. Among them, the first ever Ferris wheel, towering 264 feet into the sky, as well as familiar names like Aunt Jemima pancake syrup, juicy fruit gum, shredded wheat, and Pabst Blue Ribbon beer. Even ragtime music made its debut there, setting the stage for a cultural shift around sound and style. It wasn't just a fair. It was America announcing to the world, we've arrived. At the turn of the 20th century, America was shifting, and so were its amusements. Private entrepreneurs, sensing the thrill of both profit and power, seized the moment. They weren't just entertainers, they were opportunists, drifters, hustlers, and dreamers, rolling into rural towns with the promise of magic and vanishing just as fast. These entrepreneurs gave birth to a new American tradition, the traveling carnival. No longer tied to the tent poles of the circus, these operations functioned like self-contained fantasy machines, bringing rides, games, sideshows, and lights to even the most remote corners of the country. And after the 1893 Chicago World's Fair, where dazzling amusements captivated millions, the carnival model exploded. By the early 20th century, dozens of carnival companies crisscrossed the country, setting up alongside the country and state fairs or striking out on their own. Among the most legendary is Royal American shows. Formed in the 1920s, Royal American grew into the colossus of the carnival world, with over 80 train cars, It transported rides, tents, sideshow performers, and towering attractions from coast to coast. At its peak, it was the largest traveling carnival in the United States, known for its scale, its spectacle, and its sheer ability to overwhelm small-town America with wonder. One of the earliest large-scale traveling shows was the Johnny J. Jones Exposition. It helped define the blueprint. It seamlessly integrated rides, shows, games, and food, giving birth to the kind of fairground we recognize today. Families lined up to see the big wheel spin, gawk at sword swallowers, or toss rings for prizes. It was big, it was loud, and it felt unstoppable. World of Mirth shows ran from the early 1900s into the 1960s. This carnival had a darker reputation, famed for its freak shows and questionable ride safety. World of Mirth walked the line between thrilling and unnerving. It was the kind of carnival that dared you to step inside, promising things you'd never forget, and sometimes things you wish you could. By the early 1900s, something magical began, sweeping across America each summer. Not just festivals, but entire worlds on wheels. Across dusty roads and sleepy towns, portable Ferris wheels, swinging rides, and even compact roller coasters began appearing on the fairgrounds like mirages of joy. These weren't permanent structures. They came and went like a traveling dream, packed onto wagons, set up in a day, and gone by morning. At the heart of it all were the carnies. Gritty, nimble, often mysterious showmen who could bolt together a thrill ride with the same hands that dealt cards at the game booths. They lived on the road, moved with the season, and spoke their own slang. To kids, they were wizards. To adults, they were wild cards. And to the fair, they were everything. But this thrilling new version of the American fair didn't come out of nowhere. It evolved from the grand spectacle of the traveling circus, especially the larger-than-life empire of P.T. Barnum, whose greatest show on earth blurred the lines between entertainment and illusion, between marvel and madness. Barnum's roaring menagerie of performers, curiosities, and mechanical wonders laid the groundwork for what would become the traveling carnival. Soon the circus tent gave way to the midway. The elephants were replaced by thrill rides, but the spirit remained, something strange and spectacular rolling into town, transforming an open field into a glittering escape for one night only. By the 1920s, the Midway became the heart of the fair, buzzing with cotton candy, bakers, and rides that twisted, dropped, and spun. But these weren't the polished attractions of theme parks. They were temporary, and often built barely held together. And as the rides grew wilder, so did the danger. Today, county fairs are part of American tradition. Family outings, corn dogs, and dizzying rides. But if you peel back the layers of fried dough and flashing lights, you'll find a darker side. And that's where I come in. Stories of accidents, of neglect, of lives lost beneath the roar of the tilt-a-whirl, or in the quiet collapse of a barn. Before modern safety standards, early fairs were the Wild West of public entertainment. Untested machines, untrained workers, and no oversight. There were no safety standards. No seatbelts, harnesses, guardrails, or ride inspections. Open flames and flammable materials, lanterns, wood, and canvas tents created death traps. Untrained workers, many ride operators were young, underpaid, or unfamiliar with the equipment. Traveling carnivals disappeared after an accident, leaving behind only headlines and stories. It was one of the most anticipated attractions at the fair. Daniel Boone's Wild Animal Show. Crowds packed in nightly to witness a thrilling performance featuring a seasoned lion trainer and his collection of trained wild beasts. The star of the act wasn't Boone himself, but Carlo Thyman, a veteran animal handler with nearly 2 decades of experience. The lions, 3 of them massive, magnificent, and as many believed fully under control. But on one chilly night in February of 1894, everything went horribly wrong. As Thyman stepped into the cage for what should have been another seamless routine, something unexpected happened. The electrical lights went out. The arena plunged into darkness. Normally, lanterns were kept nearby for this exact situation. Lions feared firelight. But that night, for reasons unknown, the lanterns were missing. Then came the screaming. Spectators listened, frozen in horror, as Thyman's cries rang out from within the cage. Panic rippled through the crowd, but no one could see what was happening. Some fled, others stood in shock. Boone himself rushed into the cage and tried to force the door open, but it was jammed. Seconds ticked by like hours. When they finally got inside, he found Thyman already under attack, mauled by all 3 lions. Boone grabbed metal rods, striking the animals, yelling anything to drive them off. Eventually, someone lit a lantern, and what it revealed was a nightmare. Carl Thyman was barely alive, scalped, clawed, and bloodied from head to toe. The lions had missed his vital organs by inches. Farnell, the largest lion, had led the assault. The other 2 just followed. These were animals Thyman had worked with for years, animals he trusted. He was rushed to the hospital, where he miraculously regained consciousness long enough to recount the attack. Despite his extensive wounds and shock, he remained calm. He gave names, details, and even a timeline of the event. But he never left the hospital. Carlo Thyman died February 14th, 1894, a victim not of wild beasts, but of human error and oversight. After the tragedy, Daniel Boone's Wild Animal Show was shut down permanently. It was supposed to be a perfect fall afternoon in Lenawe County, Michigan, October 2nd, 1879. The crowd swelled with the local fairgrounds as over 600 spectators packed into a newly built grandstand, eager to watch a thrilling double horse race team. The atmosphere buzzed with anticipation, laughter, and the stomp of hooves in the distance. At around 2:50 p.m., the excitement turned to horror. Without warning, the grandstand began to tremble. The center section sagged, groaned, and in a terrifying instant gave way, sending tons of timber and humanity crashing down. The top tier collapsed onto the crowd below. Spectators screamed as they were thrown into a tangled avalanche of splintered wood, metal, and broken bones. Then the back of the grandstand toppled backward into the river. 17 people were killed instantly. In the weeks that followed, 6 more would die from their injuries, and dozens were left mangled or permanently scarred. Among the dead was the former mayor, Henry Hart, who had praised the structure only moments before the collapse, calling it the finest he had ever seen. Witnesses described chaos and carnage, a thunderous roar, followed by cries for help and the sickening snap of breaking timber. Those who weren't trapped rushed to rescue others, digging with bare hands through the wreckage, pulling out friends, neighbors, and strangers. Nearby homes became makeshift triage stations, their parlors turned into operating tables. The Croswell Opera House, known for its song and spectacle, was converted into an emergency hospital, its stage now a place of sorrow. Grief turned to outrage. The grandstand, a 100-foot-long, 28-foot-high structure, had been built hastily, with cheap materials and questionable craftsmanship. Blame fell hard on the carpenters and the contractors who had cut corners for speed or profit. The collapse shook the community to its core. Determined that such a tragedy would never happen again, Lenawee County made changes. By 1884, just 5 years later, the fair was moved to Dean Street, possibly to accommodate growth, but more likely to leave behind the ghosts of 1879. The story faded with time, overshadowed by newer fairs, newer thrills. But if you walk the riverbanks of the old fairground, you might still feel the weight of that day. A crowd, a crack, a fall, and a silence. In the summer of 1886, long before steel towers and safety harnesses, there was a crude ride known as the Ups and Downs. It was a primitive version of the Ferris wheel. No engine, no electricity, just manpower. Men stood by each car, physically pushing them into motion as they creaked and spun in uneven circles. Fair officials weren't convinced. They saw the ride for what it truly was, a rattling contraption held together with more hope than hardware. Declaring it too dangerous, they banned it from operating on the fairgrounds. But the owner had other ideas. Defiant, he set up the ride just outside the fair's fenced boundary, where he didn't need the director's approval. On the very first day, as the crowd watched with curiosity, the worst happened. The entire structure gave way. The ride collapsed in a tangle of splintered wood and twisted iron, throwing passengers to the ground. A young girl was killed in the chaos. Several others were injured, screaming, bleeding, and trapped beneath the wreckage. As onlookers rushed to help, the owner didn't stick around. He jumped onto a horse and rode off at full speed, vanishing into the countryside. He was never caught and never stood trial for what should have been a charge of manslaughter. In the bright afternoon of September 6, 1905, a cheerful crowd gathered at the Minnesota State Fair. Families, thrill seekers, and fair workers flocked to a new attraction, a hand-cranked Ferris wheel, billed by its operator as simply a ride to get off the earth. But beneath its innocent promise, hidden danger lay waiting. This Ferris wheel wasn't powered by electricity or gears. It depended entirely on human strength. Men stationed at intervals along the wheel physically pushed each wicker car around. But one carriage had a defective steel fastening, a rusted, failing bolt just waiting to let go. At only its first revolution, the compromised car rose to the top, then gave way. In an instant, the ride shattered. The wicker seats tumbled from 50 feet in the air, throwing its two helpless occupants into free fall. Mrs. Ida Sebenthal, a 50-year-old visitor from Wisconsin, suffered a fatal gash, severing her spine, and died almost instantly. Her husband, Frank, sustained a broken leg above the knee, skull injuries, and possibly a permanent disability. He survived, but was undoubtedly changed forever. People screamed for justice. After Mrs. Sebenthal's death, investigators uncovered a pattern of neglected maintenance: rusted bolts, worn joints, bent connectors, an accident waiting to happen. The ride's failed fastening had given away at the worst possible moment, and the rest followed in seconds. At the time, the Minnesota State Fair was treated as a government entity, immune from lawsuits. And our last tragedy for today's episode was a warm September afternoon in 1930 at the Ohio State Fairgrounds. The air buzzed with excitement. Families strolled among colorful booths. Children's laughter mixed with the sound of lively music, and the scent of popcorn and cotton candy drifted through the crowds. But behind the festive scene, danger quietly took hold. Inside one of the large wooden exhibition buildings, a spark, whether from faulty wiring or a careless ember, ignited a blaze. Thick smoke quickly filled the air. twisting toward the ceiling as flames spread relentlessly through the dry wood and piles of hay. What began as a subtle wisp of smoke became a roaring inferno. Panic rippled through the crowds as visitors scrambled for the exits. The air grew thick with choking smoke and heat, and pathways quickly became clogged. Many struggled to escape the collapsing structure, while others were forced to flee into the chaotic swirl of people and debris. The fire raged fiercely as firefighters rushed to contain the blaze, battling the flames that consumed the heart of the fairgrounds. Despite the efforts, the disaster claimed several lives and left dozens injured, casting a long shadow over the joyous celebration. In the aftermath, the fairgrounds lay in ruin, the smell of smoke lingering like a ghost among the ashes. At least 5 people died in the 1930 Ohio State Fair fire, with dozens more injured. The tragedy revealed the urgent need for safer building standards and emergency protocols. From that day forward, fire safety became a priority. Exits were improved, building materials reconsidered, and the lessons learned etched into the fair's legacy. Thank you for joining me on this episode of Death-Kissed Traveler, where we peeled back the curtain on the early, often grim history of county fairs. Behind the bright lights and the lively music and the joyous crowds lies a darker truth, a world shadowed by tragedy and loss. These early disasters remind us that the thrill of the fairground came at a steep cost, one paid in lives lost and families shattered. But what we've uncovered today is only the first chapter in a much larger story. As fairs grew in popularity and rides became faster, taller, and more daring, the dangers multiplied. The mid-20th century saw a rise in fatal accidents, sometimes resulting in multiple casualties or tragedies that echoed through communities for decades. In Part 2, we'll journey into the dark history of county fairs from 1950 to 2000, a time where the thrill of the ride came with an even greater risk. I'll tell you the stories of catastrophic ride failures, devastating accidents, and chilling incidents that shook the very foundation. So if you think fairs are just about fun and games, think again. The history of these fairs is filled with the haunting stories of death and disaster, stories that demand to be told and remembered. Make sure you subscribe and join me as we continue to explore the shadows lurking behind the flashing lights. This podcast is produced by Sun-Kissed Traveler, the travel agency that takes the stress out of planning a vacation. Check the link in the show notes or go to sun-kissedtraveler.com.